England squad for the Six Nations 2024 has been announced, folks. First impressions, it is a mix of some old boys and a bunch of uncapped guys. Steve Borthwick has not been afraid to bring in some bolters, but we'll go through the squad, the fixtures, and you guys can let us know your thoughts. If you've been keeping up with this kind of series of Six Nations previews, been fortunate enough to speak to a few former players. I spoke to Welsh and British and Irish Lions legend Adam Jones regarding the Welsh squad. If you haven't seen that, feel free to check that out, get his thoughts. Bernard Jackman, former Irish international and current RTE pundit, got his thoughts too. For England, I was again privileged to talk to another former international in Nick Easter, so we'll get to his thoughts in just a second. Cheers to him for coming along yesterday England time, my morning here in NZ. But I should say first a big thank you to eToro, because this episode is brought to you by eToro. They are the official investing and trading partner of Premiership Rugby. Tackle investing the smart way and join millions of UK investors on eToro today, the friendly platform for serious investors. eToro is a multi-asset investment platform. The value of your investments may go up or down. Your capital is at risk. But as I said, big thank you to eToro for being the sponsors of this one. Let's hear from Nick, and then we'll kind of wrap up the remainder of the points that maybe he didn't kind of touch on in our limited time. So here's Nick. Well, folks, England's squad for the Six Nations 2024 has been announced. I'm joined by former England international Nick Easter. Mate, how's it going? You seen the squad?
Hi, mate. Yeah, not too bad over this this side of the world. Yeah, I have seen the squad. And overall, pretty positive about it. I mean, what he's done first and foremost, which we didn't have with the old regime under Eddie Jones, of course, is he's picked on form. There's 7 Northampton players in, I believe. 5 Bath players, and I think 5 or 6 Quins players. Teams that are up there in the mix, which is good, rewarding form. And of course, this is a time after a World Cup where it is a slight transitional period. Some certain sides have a bit more of a clear out than others. England are sort of halfway there, it seems. There's still a few of the old guard in there. Dan Cole, Jamie George, which I'm very pleased. I think that's pretty obvious, but you've still got to make the decision of captain, because I think he's a very personable lad to the camera. Obviously, he's a quality player and he deserves his place first and foremost. He's the best hooker we've got. So that goes without saying. But as a personality, as a character, as a guy who wants to try and bring England rugby together and rekindle that connection with the fans, which has been a struggle for the last 3 years, I think a very, very good appointment. So that's positive.
Yeah, it does seem to be a real mix of youth and experience. Like, you got a bunch of guys like, Danny Kerr, 37, like you mentioned, Jamie George, captain, 33. You got Joe Marler still there, but then he's also brought in a bunch of the uncapped guys as well. Any of those guys you're particularly excited about? There's a lot of talk about this winger, Emmanuel Feiwa-Bosso.
Yes, he was actually, I'm director of rugby for a side in National 1 at the moment. And last year I got notified, I forgot, but he was actually on loan to one of the teams there. So he's had a sharp rise, but I believe he was at university in Exeter. I could be wrong there, but with the way Rob Baxter, the director of rugby there, is trying to rebuild the Exeter model, and they've been doing brilliantly this season. And he's been rewarded, as has Henry Slade. Brilliant for him. I'm a big fan of Henry Slade's. He's had never really been given full faith in an England shirt, under previous regimes, but he's been outstanding at the moment. And a lot of exciting talent, Finn Smith in there, fighting out for the number 10 berth with Marcus Smith and George Ford. I think he's in with a good shout. Fraser Dingwall, who's been in the squad God knows how many times, is uncapped. Hopefully he gets a shout as well in the centre. There's a few omissions there which are a bit surprising. Nick Ezekwe, I don't think has been on any sort of form at all. And he's had previous at international level where he hasn't quite cut the mustard to when he's played there before. Whereas you've still got Joe Launchbury, at Harlequins, playing well in a Harlequins pack that's going well, and Johnny Hill up at Sale, who's been you know, playing well in the engine room, and you know, got enough, and both of them have plenty of experience, but you know, aren't too old as well. So you know, that was an interesting decision. A lot of people talking about Alfie Barbary, who's been pulling up trees, a ball carrier for Bath, and you know, he's managed to get a run of games together because you know, fitness has always been an issue for him. And I think Steve Borthwick's come out and said, you know, his impending possible ban for the red card had a part to play. However, I'm sure, you know, if you really wanted him a team, you'd probably pick him. And then if he was banned, you'd be able to replace him with someone. So maybe, you know, a few doubts about his sort of all-round game, possibly. But other than that, you know, a good blend there. And you've got the experienced guys to help the youth. You know, guys like Chandler Cunningham South, not been a regular starter for Quins at all, been off the bench, but he was in the under-20s last year, and he was, you know, he was outstanding in that. So he's a guy through the pathway system. Tom Pearson, another young lad, you know, with the falling out of London Irish, who's been doing well at Northampton. Fraser Dingwell, we've spoken about. Tommy Freeman, I'm so pleased to see him in there, along with another teammate, George Furbank, who I think's been, you know, linking with Finn Smith as a dual playmaker brilliantly for Northampton's attack. Oscar Beard, another centre. So in the centres, you know, they're pretty raw. And at 10, they're pretty raw as well. You know, outside of George Ford, you know, Marcus, he's yet to establish himself, and Finn Smith's obviously going to be kicking at their heels as an uncapped one. So, you know, there's going to be a very different looking England team, even with, you know, the experienced and old heads in there, I would imagine, with that first selection.
Do we see much impact with the absence of Owen Farrell, or do you think the team's got the experience to just kind of keep chugging along?
There's enough experience there. It'll be very different. I mean, I know Owen Farrell changed, you know, he adapted, as all good leaders do, his leadership style. You know, he was previously clearly, you know, he's always demanded high standards. You know, he's a world-class player, and he's been up there for a long, long time, and puts himself, you know, above the parapet in terms of the pressure moments. But he's sort of relaxed, if you like, amongst the group, as opposed to being as stern as he was before, and has helped create a sort of a happier environment in terms of, you know, empowering other players to speak up and voice their opinion on things. And I think Jamie George is very, very good mates with him at club level, and he'll continue that type of leadership.
Few guys over playing their trade in France missing out due to the kind of selection policy that England have got. Henry Arundel kind of being the most high profile of those guys. Do you think this is just what you get if you play your rugby overseas, or does England need to kind of look at relaxing that? Because we've got a similar system down here in New Zealand.
Yeah, look, I think, you know, you mentioned Carl Sinclair. Yeah, he's signed for Toulon next year. I think Will Collier, another tight head who should have had 50 caps by now, you know, with any decent selection. But, you know, it looks like, you know, he'll just settle with the 2 or whatever he's got at the moment. I believe he might be off to France as well. And, you know, there's a number of others. Dave Ribbons in the second row. You know, we spoke about the second rows. He's clearly in Toulon. Look, Steve Borthwick's had to, you know, apply that rule stringently. You know, there is no wiggle room with the RFU with that. And I support the rule in theory. However, we're in practice at the moment, and it's a short career, as we all know. And, you know, playing for England has to become the pinnacle for any English rugby player. And I think we've lost that. And I know Will Carling, a previous captain, mentioned it, but I think it's clear with the exodus leaving for France. And, you know, these guys have got to look after themselves. You've seen it in golf with Liv. You know, money talks. You know, you've got to provide. You know, in a very sort of uncertain world we're in at the moment, you know, you're going to have to provide for your family. A lot of guys have young families, and you can't begrudge them the opportunity to go and earn money and have the different experience and play in the best league in the world and play with the league with the best players in the world. Let's not forget the rugby reasons as well. If you get that opportunity, then it's going to be very, very hard to turn it down. And, you know, is the pull for playing for England, and I know they've come through now with these new hybrid central contracts, but they won't really be enforced until after the summer, is the pull for playing for England like it was? And I think we're at a stage now where we have to do what's best for English rugby, because English rugby, and like, you know, in New Zealand, it starts with the All Blacks, it starts with the national team. If you want rugby to be participated in heavily. You want audiences to be big. You want TV money to be big. The elite team, the flagship team, has to be performing and winning. And if that means we've got to relax this rule for certain players, I believe that's what we've got to do. And then when it creeps back up and maybe the Premiership are able to sort of not be too far off some of these huge salaries from France in particular, then perhaps they can look at sort of tightening it a bit again. But my concern looking at this side is, with the French side, Anton Dupont's not going to be there. The Ireland side, that's been announced, and they don't really have the luxury, Ireland, as well as they've been doing in terms of strength and depth to make wholesale changes. They'll be strong. Scotland will be strong. Where England have lacked in the last sort of 2 years is the power game. And I'm thinking, you're looking at these players, and as well as they've been doing in the Premiership and in Europe and the talent they are, I'm looking at it, I'm going, you look at that with the French team, for example, France, and you say, how many big beasts, how many big ball-carrying, powerful beasts are actually in that team for the next 4 or 5 years that are going to be doing that job? Because, the rugby at the moment is very much a power game above all else, whether you like it or not. And I think we need our best players in there able to produce winning test match rugby. And then, we can look to maybe going back to the law, the rules as it is now.
Yeah, there's a bit of talk about that here in New Zealand as well, how Scott Robertson maybe wants a little bit of wiggle room in that area, but we'll have to wait and see. Lastly, Nick, I mean, like you just said, there's a lot of talk about this big French side. There's a lot of talk about the Irish. Scots have got a decent little fixtures list. Are England flying under the radar a wee bit? Is there a little bit less pressure on them, or do you think it's kind of same, that it's kind of win or bust?
No, there's always pressure when you play for England. I mean, if you're not in the without, you'd probably say arrogant Englishman, but you got to expect to be in the top 2 in the Six Nations every year. You have to. That's the bare minimum. With the facilities, the strength in depth, the playing numbers, the finances spent obviously on the training and the squad. You've got to, with the resources available, you've got to be looking at top 2. However, we know how competitive Test match rugby is now. We know the top 2 sides in the world, or 2 of the top 3 or 4, are Ireland and France. They play Ireland and France towards the end. I think it's a really, really good fixture list for England, having Italy, I think then Wales, then Scotland. I think you're basically going from the weakest side all the way through to the strongest side. It is virtually like that. And I think that's great when you're starting off with, a side like this. And, I would like to see England, evolve their game. It was a big kick fest in the World Cup. It was there obviously as a tactic and a strategy to do a job in certain games, but we need to move on with other parts of our game. And, for these youngsters also to get the confidence amongst the senior players, you get a couple of early wins under your belt. And a tournament like the Six Nations is all about momentum in a short period of time. And, I think the fixtures have fallen favourably. But, the team I'm looking at in the Six Nations, Scotland, to be honest with you, I think the French will be demanding a Grand Slam after the disappointment. They don't have Anton Dupont, by far the best player in the world. Ireland without Sexton, how are they going to fare? And they've got England away, they've got France away as well, so that's a tough fixture list. Scotland have got France and England at home, and they aren't losing a number of players, whereas England, Farrell and Courtney Laws, key leaders, quality players for England, they've retired. Ireland have had a couple. France with Anton Dupont. They're probably the most established side, and watch out for Scotland.
Well, if Scotland can get over that hoodoo of trying to get a result against Ireland, you never know. But not too far away. Six Nations kicks off just in a couple of weeks. But cheers, Nick, for your insights, and
thank you very much for having me.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
Right, as I said, cheers to Nick for coming along. That was fantastic. I actually read a stat the night before. I was due to speak to Nick, about like tackle stats in the Six Nations, like because Hamish Watson had some incredible stats, and it said like highest tackle percentage of guys who'd completed over 100 tackles, and Nick Easter was 5th on the list at like 97%. I didn't bring that up to him in my conversation with him. I don't know if he's a stats nerd, but yeah, it was very cool to kind of see that stat. Now, Nick obviously had some great points, Jamie George being captain and whatnot, about the kind of exciting prospects that England have got coming through. I should also mention, Luke Cowan-Dickey's back in the squad. That's fantastic. It may see the minutes of Theo Dan a bit more limited because Jamie George already plays a lot of minutes, and I feel like Cowan-Dickey may hog the rest of them, but we'll kind of have to wait and see. The propping stocks, there's no uncapped guys there, but Joe Hayes is only 24, which is, in terms of propping years, very much on the young side. I feel like the back row, as Nick touched on as well, is really hard working. Ethan Roots, a lot of tackles in that guy. He's had a pretty meteoric rise since leaving NPC Rugby here in Auckland. And then Chandler Cumming himself, busy tackling machine when he is on the field. Ben Curry, dominant tackles. Don Brandt's back into the side, which is pleasing for him. Ben Earl was in phenomenal form at the Rugby World Cup, so we'll be able to see if he can kind of continue some of that. But the back row is certainly very competitive. A couple of the old boys at 9 with Ben Spencer being back into the side, with Danny Carey and Alex Mitchell. I know there's some injuries to the other guys like Van Portfleet and whatnot, but yeah, there's certainly no real bolter there in that regard. Nick already touched on the 10s, but it will be interesting to see if Marcus Smith plays fullback at all during this campaign. I know you've got Freddie Stewart there, but they can also deploy him on the wing. They've also got George Furbank there too, as Nick touched on. That whole Northampton side's been good, so there's no questioning kind of that selection. But there's a lot of excitement in this England side. Whether Steve Borthwick is willing to kind of chance his arm a wee bit, or whether he keeps things conservative, is one that kind of remains to be seen. Like Nick said, the fixtures list is pretty kind. Italy away, Wales at home, Scotland away, Ireland at home, and then France away. That is potentially easiest to toughest, just as he said it. I mean, the fact that France is away and Ireland's at home maybe gives you a better chance against Ireland than against France, but two very tough teams. Scotland away is certainly one that they can't take lightly either, but yeah, we'll kind of have to wait and see how they go. You guys let us know your thoughts. What do you think on the eligibility of the guys who are based overseas at the moment? It's a conundrum, as I mentioned, that we are still kind of playing through here in NZ. And yeah, how do you think this Steve Borthwick England side is going to go in their second year? You guys take care, and talk to you again soon. See you later.